Well, tell us about Passenger, and I love the story about Jaco Pastorius coming in. And
yes.
That's a classic tale.
Well, Jaco was someone I had heard about. This was pre-Passenger, so I guess we'll put Passenger aside for a minute and talk Jaco. Yes, beings that I was really kind of, North Texas, I went there to get an education, really, a musical education. My high school year in Austin was a pivotal year because I met a gentleman named James Polk, who is a keyboard player, in those days, primarily a B3 organ player, who led a jazz trio on the East Side, kind of Larry Young styled, with a little bit of Jimmy Smith or Groove Holmes thrown in for good measure. But Polk was the real thing. And up to that point, I had heard a lot of really amazing, good classic jazz records, but I had never had the club experience. I had never walked into, that's not quite true, but rarely had heard real live jazz in a club. And when I walked in and heard that jazz trio for the first time, B3 organ just pumping, I knew I had some things to learn. And that's why I wanted to go to North Texas State and learn all I could about playing jazz. So when I came back to Austin, still, while in love with blues and other forms of music, still, jazz was the real challenge, harmonically, rhythmically, all kinds of ways. So I tended towards gigs that, while not being all that hip, paid the bills and gave me an opportunity to learn jazz standards.
Got it.
So, I ended up with hotel gigs where we could actually play jazz and club gigs that allowed jazz. So around 1976, I'm going to say, 5 or 6, I was working with a gentleman in a jazz trio named Bobby Doyle, another great musician who people never got the opportunity to hear about, but a fine keyboard player and an amazing singer who knew every jazz standard in the world, not only could play them, but sing them, the lyrics. So learned a lot from that guy. Bobby Doyle had briefly, just prior to my meeting him, he had been hired to replace David Clayton Thomas in Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Because David Clayton Thomas had left Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and Bobby was hired as the lead vocalist and keyboard player, which impressed me, which is why I wanted to work with him. So I ended up working with him. And at some point, Blood, Sweat, and Tears passed through Austin. Bobby was no longer with him. I think he had been fired due to alcohol. But they were still in contact. So Blood, Sweat, and Tears came through town and called Bobby up and said, "Hey, would you like to come see the show?" And Bobby said, "Yeah, sure. Can I bring my bass player?" And they said, "Oh, yes, bring your bass player." And what I didn't know, and unfortunately didn't find out that evening, was Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Bobby Colombi had kind of discovered Jaco in Florida, and had hired Jaco briefly in Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And so they were kind of, taunting Bobby, saying, "Yes, bring your bass player." So I went to Bobby's to pick him up. And that evening, all he wanted to do was drink beer and play dominoes. And unfortunately, that's what we ended up doing. The next day, just about every musician I know in Austin made contact with me and said, "Roscoe, oh man, those who saw Blood, Sweat, and Tears saw Jaco with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. But after that, Jaco just hit the town and hit the clubs and started sitting in with, whoever was playing. So a lot of my friends saw Jaco that night, and everybody was just raving. I mean, the town was just abuzz about this guy, Jaco, who was playing with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And they said, oh, he has an album coming out. They said, you just won't believe the stuff this guy was doing. We had never heard anything like it. Right. And I heard so much about it that and this record that was coming out that I was just waiting for it to come out, and I found out what the release date was, and I bought it on the day it came out. It hit my turntable and it never came off. 3 days later, after the record was released, by then Jaco had just joined Weather Report and came through Austin with Weather Report for the first time, which I don't think I even knew, because I honest to God, can't remember if I went to the concert. I don't think I did. But I was working my gig with Bobby Doyle, my trio gig, and we played 3 sets a night, kind of long sets, and we had just finished the first set. And during the break, my friend Fred Walter, who I just mentioned, came up to me and he said, Roscoe, he said, Jaco Pastorius is outside. He's at the door and they won't let him in. He doesn't have the cover. And I just went, oh, damn. And I headed to the door. And I got halfway there and I remembered that the cover was $1. and I kind of went, dope, you've been had. And I turned around, I went back to Fred. I said, that was a good one, man. You had me going. I was halfway to the door. And he said, no, man, Jaco's at the door. And I said, yeah, he doesn't have $1. Give me a break. And Fred said, turn around. And I turned around and he was probably 4 inches from my face. And he looked exactly like he did on that record cover, except for he was wearing glasses. But literally 4 inches from my face, right in my face.
Bizarro.
And I was stunned. And I had heard the record. So who wouldn't be? And almost speechless. And he stood there and I went, you want to play? Only thing I could think of to say. And he said, sure. I owned 3 basses at that time. I had an upright bass and 2 Fender precision basses, stock 70s precision basses. One was fretted and the other had a plain fretless neck.
Okay.
Like they made back in the day, no lines on it.
Right.
Rosewood board. So Jaco said, yeah, sure. He went up, took the stage. I waited to see him pick up the fretless because I only had the Fenders on stage.
Right.
He picked up the fretted, played the whole set. Amazing on a P bass. Just amazing. I just sat at the bar just watching, my new hero and my last hero, I must say, too. Really, no heroes after Jaco, but amazing. So he finished his set. He came and sat down next to me at the bar. I think we were both drinking a Koch. He didn't drink in those days or do anything when I met him. And he said, hey, man, can I play drums next set? And I said, yeah, sure. I mean, the cat was amazing. I was sure he'd probably be a great drummer too.
Right.
And he said, okay, let's see what you can do. I was like, oh, all right. But he finished the evening. We played out the evening. He on drums and me on bass, and needless to say, it was a gas. It was really a gas. And I invited him over to my crib, which in those days was an apartment, 2-bedroom apartment. Had a girlfriend at the time. She was asleep. I had to go wake her up because she had heard nothing for the past 3 days. Jaco Pastorius is spinning.
Right.
I had to wake her up. It's like,
you'll never believe who's here.
Get up. Jaco's here. And she's like, huh? And we hung out till 5 a.m, drinking tea. No drink, no drugs, just hanging, talking music. I have to admit that I thought he was a little strange. Which, I had heard his record and I just played with him, so I knew he was brilliant.
Right.
I knew he was a level beyond. So when I would ask him questions, I would get answers which didn't always immediately make sense to me.
Interesting.
So I had never met anyone like him. Really, kind of very different. Obviously high intellect, but different. And, I asked him, did he play upright bass? Because I had one sitting in the corner. And he said, I had one at one time, but Florida, it's so humid, it just fell apart.
Yeah.
And asked him the questions you'd expect I would ask him. It's like,
sure.
How do you get that sound? And he said, well, I play a jazz bass, He said, man, you should just put a bridge pickup on your bass. He said, you can't really play as fast on a P bass, when you're playing there in the middle position over that pickup. He said, you got to play down closer to the bridge where the tension is greater and the resistance is greater. The string isn't as floppy there. And that's where your harmonics will really sound, through the bridge pickup.
Aha.
And I asked him, of course, why he didn't pick up my fretless. I said, how come you didn't play my fretless? No lines, man. And I was kind of like, well, I don't need lines, It's like I play the upright. I play the fretless. And like he picked up my bass and said, yeah, can you play this?
So after that initial time hanging out with them in Austin, did you hang out with him after that, or what were your experiences with him after that, Jaco, that is?
Well, yeah, needless to say, he left town. I took my fretted P bass over to my luthier. We pulled the frets. We put a bridge pickup on it. And I still have that bass. So I still have the bass that Jaco played on that night as a fretted is now my fretless, one of them. So major influence, obviously. And yes, we met many times after that. Anytime Weather Report was playing in the same town where I was, I would go to hear them, whether that was Austin or LA or wherever. Any chance to hear Weather Report I took.
Right.